A solitary cowboy risks his life to save a widow from a hurricane, and they find love in the storm. Welcome to today's story about courage, survival, and unexpected love in the heart of the American frontier. You're about to witness the incredible tale of a lonely cowboy who risks everything to save a widow during one of the most devastating hurricanes to hit the Texas coast in 1887. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The summer of 1887 had been merciless along the Texas Gulf Coast. Cole Mitchell wiped the sweat from his brow as he guided his horse Thunder across the sun-baked plains toward the small town of Cedar Creek. At 32, Cole had spent the better part of his life drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to call any place home. His weathered hands and the deep lines around his steel blue eyes told the story of a man who had learned to rely on no one but himself. The air felt different that morning, thick and oppressive, with an unusual stillness that made Thunder's ears twitch nervously. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon like an army preparing for battle, and the wind carried a strange metallic taste that Cole had never experienced before. As he rode into Cedar Creek, the town's main street buzzed with unusual activity. Shopkeepers were boarding up windows, and families loaded wagons with their most precious belongings. Cole dismounted outside Murphy's general store, where old Pete Murphy was hammering wooden planks across his storefront. "What's got everyone spooked, Pete?" Cole asked, securing Thunder's reins to the hitching post. Pete paused his hammering and wiped his face with a dirty rag. "Hurricane's coming, son. Weather station in Galveston sent word yesterday. Biggest storm they've seen in decades, heading straight for us." His voice carried the weight of genuine fear. "Most folks are heading inland, but some are too stubborn or too poor to leave." Cole's gaze drifted down the street to a modest wooden house with a small garden out front. Through the window, he could see a woman in a dark dress moving about frantically, clearly preparing for the storm's arrival. Her auburn hair caught the dim light as she worked, and even from a distance, Cole could sense her determination mixed with barely controlled panic. "That's Rebecca Hayes." Pete noticed Cole's interest. "Lost her husband last spring to pneumonia. Been struggling to keep that place running on her own ever since. Too proud to accept much help and too broke to leave town." Pete shook his head sadly. "She's got no business trying to weather this storm alone." Cole watched as Rebecca emerged from her house carrying an armload of supplies. She was younger than he'd expected, probably in her late 20s, with an elegant bearing that suggested she'd once known better times. Her movements were efficient but strained, and Cole could see the exhaustion in the way she set down her burden. "Has anyone offered to help her?" Cole asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Few folks tried, but she's got her pride. Won't take charity, she says." Pete resumed his hammering. "Can't say I blame her, but pride don't stop hurricane winds." The wind began to pick up, sending dust devils dancing down the main street. Cole felt Thunder shift restlessly behind him, and he knew the horse's instincts were telling him to run. But something kept Cole's feet planted on the wooden boardwalk, his eyes drawn to the woman who was about to face nature's fury alone. As if sensing his gaze, Rebecca looked up from her work. Their eyes met across the street for just a moment, long enough for Cole to see the fear she was trying so hard to hide, and for her to recognize something in his steady gaze that spoke of reliability and strength. She quickly looked away, but not before Cole caught a glimpse of the vulnerable woman beneath the proud facade. "I reckon I'll stick around town for a while," Cole said to Pete, who had stopped hammering to watch the exchange. Pete raised an eyebrow. "You might be the only fool crazy enough to stay. Sides Rebecca there. Storm's supposed to hit sometime tomorrow evening." Cole tipped his hat and led Thunder toward the livery stable. "Then I guess she won't be facing it alone." As the afternoon wore on, the wind continued to strengthen, and the sky took on an ominous green tint that made even the most experienced frontiersman uneasy. Cole spent the day helping other residents secure their property and load wagons, but his attention kept drifting to Rebecca's house. He watched her work tirelessly to prepare her small home. reinforcing windows and moving vulnerable items to higher ground. When evening fell, most of the town's population had evacuated inland. The streets that had bustled with activity just hours before now stood eerily empty, except for the occasional tumbleweed blown by the increasingly fierce wind. Cole sat on the porch of the abandoned hotel, keeping vigil over the town and its few remaining inhabitants. Rebecca's house glowed with lamplight well into the night as she continued her preparations. Cole wanted to approach her, to offer his help directly, but something in her bearing suggested she wouldn't welcome the intrusion. Instead, he content himself with watching over her from a distance, ready to act if the situation demanded it. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me continue bringing you these tales. The night air grew thick with moisture, and Cole could taste salt on the wind. The storm was still hours away, but its presence could already be felt in every gust of wind and flash of distant lightning. As he settled in for what would likely be a sleepless night, Cole made a silent promise to himself and to the brave woman across the street. When the hurricane struck, she wouldn't face it alone. Dawn brought no relief from the mounting tension in the air. Cole woke to the sound of shutters banging violently against the hotel walls and the ominous roar of wind that seemed to grow stronger by the hour. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of yellow-green, and the air pressure felt so heavy it was difficult to breathe. He quickly checked on Thunder in the stable, ensuring the horse had plenty of water and feed. The animal's eyes showed white with fear, and his powerful body trembled with each crash of thunder. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "We'll get through this." By mid-morning, the rain began, first as fat droplets that splattered in the dust, then as a steady downpour that turned the street into a muddy river. From his position on the hotel porch, Cole could see Rebecca moving about her house, making final preparations. She had covered her windows with wooden boards and moved everything of value to the highest shelves. The wind was now howling like a living thing, bending the sturdy oak trees nearly in half and sending debris flying through the air like deadly projectiles. Cole pulled his hat down tight and made his way across the street, fighting against the powerful gusts that threatened to knock him off his feet. He pounded on Rebecca's door, shouting over the wind. "Mom, it's Cole Mitchell. You need to get to the church. It's the strongest building in town." The door opened a crack, revealing Rebecca's pale face. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins and whipped around her face in the wind. "Mr. Mitchell, what are you doing here? I thought everyone had left." "Not everyone," Cole shouted back. "This storm's getting worse by the minute. Your house won't hold against what's coming." Rebecca's green eyes flashed with stubborn determination. "This house has weathered plenty of storms before. I won't be driven out of my home." A massive gust of wind chose that moment to slam into the house, causing the entire structure to shudder and groan. Several roof shingles tore away and went spinning into the gray void of the storm. Rebecca's face went white, but she held her ground. "Ma'am, please," Cole pressed, rain streaming down his face. "I've seen hurricanes before, down in Louisiana. This one's going to tear this town apart. Come with me to the church. It's built of stone and has a proper foundation." Before Rebecca could respond, a tremendous crack echoed through the air. They both turned to see one of the large oak trees near the house beginning to lean precariously, its massive root system loosened by the rain-soaked ground. If it fell, it would crush the entire east side of Rebecca's house. "That settles it," Cole said firmly, pushing the door open wider. "Get whatever you can't live without, and let's go. Now." The urgency in his voice finally broke through Rebecca's stubborn pride. She nodded quickly and rushed inside, emerging moments later with a small carpet bag and a wooden box clutched to her chest. Cole could see tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks as she took one last look at her home. "What about my chickens, my garden?" she cried. "The animals know how to find shelter," Cole assured her, taking her arm to steady her against the wind. "And gardens can be replanted. People can't be replaced. The journey to the church, normally a 5-minute walk, became a treacherous battle against the elements. The wind was so strong it literally lifted them off their feet at times, and the rain fell in horizontal sheets that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Cole wrapped his arm around Rebecca's waist, using his larger frame to shield her from the worst of the wind. Twice, they had to take shelter behind buildings, as particularly violent gusts sent large pieces of debris flying past their heads. A section of roof from the barbershop sailed by like a giant playing card, and the wooden sign from the saloon tumbled end over end down the street. "I can't do this," Rebecca shouted over the howling wind, her strength beginning to fail. "Yes, you can," Cole yelled back, his arm tightening around her. "We're almost there." Just as they reached the church steps, the great oak tree finally succumbed to the storm's fury. The crack of its falling echoed like a gunshot, and they turned to see it crash directly onto Rebecca's house, crushing the roof and east wall exactly as Cole had predicted. Rebecca let out a cry of anguish and buried her face against Cole's chest. Leave a comment below about what you think of the story so far. Inside the stone church, they found 3 other holdouts: old Doc Henley, who was too frail to travel; Maria Santos, whose husband had been caught out of town when the storm hit; and young Tommy Fletcher, whose family had sent him to fetch their grandmother but had been unable to return before the worst of the storm arrived. The church offered blessed relief from the wind, though they could hear it roaring overhead like a freight train. The windows had been boarded up from the inside, and the heavy wooden doors were barred shut. Oil lamps provided flickering light that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Rebecca sat heavily in one of the pews, still clutching her wooden box. Cole could see her shoulders shaking, whether from cold, shock, or grief. He couldn't tell. Probably all 3. He removed his damp coat and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "You saved my life." "Storm's not over yet," Cole replied quietly, settling beside her. "But these walls have stood for 30 years. They'll hold." Outside, the hurricane raged with increasing intensity. The sound was unlike anything Cole had ever experienced, a constant deafening roar, punctuated by the crash of falling trees and the screech of metal being torn apart. The very air seemed to vibrate with the storm's power. As the hours passed, the small group huddled together for warmth and comfort. Doc Henley shared medical supplies from his bag, while Maria distributed food she'd brought from her store. But it was Cole and Rebecca who found themselves drawn together, sharing quiet conversations in the lamplight while the storm raged outside. "I built that house with my husband," Rebecca confided, her fingers tracing the carved edges of her wooden box. "Every board, every nail, it was going to be our forever home." Her voice caught. "Now it's gone." Cole wanted to comfort her, but words seemed inadequate against such loss. Instead, he simply sat beside her in the flickering lamplight, his steady presence offering what comfort it could as the hurricane continued its relentless assault on their small sanctuary. The hurricane raged for 18 hours, battering the church with winds that reached nearly 100 miles per hour. Throughout the long night and into the following day, the small group huddled together in their stone sanctuary, listening to the storm's fury gradually exhaust itself against the Gulf Coast. Cole found himself watching Rebecca as she slept fitfully against his shoulder. Despite losing everything she'd worked for, she had helped comfort young Tommy when he cried for his grandmother, and assisted Doc Henley when his arthritis flared up from the damp cold. Her strength impressed him more than any bronco-busting cowboy he'd ever known. When she stirred awake in the early morning hours, their faces were inches apart in the dim lamplight. For a moment, neither moved, both aware of the intimacy of their position, but reluctant to break the spell. Rebecca's green eyes held a vulnerability Cole had never seen before, and he found himself studying the delicate freckles across her nose and the way her auburn hair caught the golden light. "The wind's dying down," she whispered, her breath warm against his cheek. "Storm's moving inland," Cole confirmed, though he made no move to put distance between them. Should be safe to go outside in a few hours. Rebecca's gaze dropped to the wooden box in her lap, the only possession she'd managed to save. With trembling fingers, she opened it to reveal a collection of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a small daguerreotype, and a simple gold wedding ring. "These are all I have left of my life with James," she said quietly. "We were married 6 years, had dreams of children, of growing old together on our little piece of land." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't know how to start over at 28. I don't know if I even want to." Cole felt something shift inside his chest, a protective instinct he'd never experienced before. "You're stronger than you know," he said gently. "I watched you prepare for this storm, saw how you helped everyone here last night. That takes courage most people don't have. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel." "You don't understand." Rebecca shook her head. "I have no money, no family, no home. James left debts I can't pay. I was barely keeping the house before this storm destroyed it." Her voice broke. "I have nothing left to build on." "You've got yourself," Cole said firmly, "and you're not alone in this." Their conversation was interrupted by a gradual lessening of the wind's howl. Doc Henley stirred from his sleep and announced that he thought the worst had passed. One by one, the survivors began to stir and prepare for what they might find outside. When they finally unbarred the church doors and stepped into the morning light, the devastation was staggering. Cedar Creek looked as though a giant had picked it up and shaken it like a child's toy. Trees lay uprooted across the main street, their massive trunks blocking passage. The roof of Murphy's general store had been completely torn away, leaving the interior exposed to the elements. Several smaller buildings had been reduced to piles of lumber, and debris was scattered everywhere. Pieces of homes, furniture, and personal belongings strewn across the landscape like confetti. Rebecca stood frozen at the sight of her house, or what remained of it. The oak tree had indeed crushed the entire east side, and the roof had partially collapsed. The small garden she'd tended so carefully was buried under fallen branches and debris. Everything she'd worked for was gone. Cole watched her face crumple as the full reality hit her. Without thinking, he stepped closer and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for only a moment before collapsing against his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his shirt. "I'm not usually so weak." "You're not weak," Cole said fiercely, his arms tightening around her. "You're human, and you just lost everything. Anyone would cry." As the day progressed, the other survivors began to assess the damage and plan their next moves. Doc Henley's clinic had survived mostly intact, and he began treating minor injuries from flying debris. Maria's store was damaged, but repairable. Young Tommy's grandmother's house had lost its roof, but the walls stood firm. But Rebecca had nowhere to go, and no resources to rebuild. As evening approached, and the others returned to their damaged homes, she remained sitting on the church steps, staring at the ruins of her life. Cole had spent the day helping with rescue efforts and securing his horse, but his attention kept returning to the woman on the church steps. As darkness fell, he approached her with a decision made. "Come with me," he said simply. Rebecca looked up, confused. "Where?" "I've got a job waiting at the Double R Ranch, about 2 days' ride north of here. Owner's looking for a cook and housekeeper. Pays fair, and there's a cabin that comes with the position." Cole held out his hand. "Fresh start. New place. No one there knows your story unless you want to tell it." Rebecca stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a lifeline. "Why would you do this? You barely know me." Cole was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Maybe because I've been drifting alone for too long," he said finally. "Maybe because you deserve better than being left to face this alone. Or maybe because I've never met anyone with half your courage." He paused. "Or maybe because yesterday, when I thought that tree might crush you before I could get you to safety, I realized I cared more about a near stranger than I'd cared about anything in years." Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, and Rebecca saw something in Cole's expression that made her heart skip. It wasn't pity or charity. It was genuine admiration mixed with something deeper, something that spoke of possibilities she'd thought died with her husband. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle as he helped her to her feet. "I don't know if I'm ready for complications," she said honestly. "No complications," Cole promised. "Just two people helping each other toward a better tomorrow. Whatever else happens, happens naturally or not at all." As they stood together in the ruins of her old life, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced since James's death: hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel impossible. The journey to the Double R Ranch took 3 days instead of 2, as they had to navigate around storm damage and flooded rivers. Cole had purchased a gentle mare named Daisy for Rebecca, using most of his savings to ensure she had proper transportation and supplies for their new life. During those days on the trail, they began to truly know each other. Rebecca spoke of her marriage to James, a love born of friendship and mutual respect rather than passion. She described their quiet life together, their simple dreams, and the devastating loneliness that followed his death. Cole, in turn, shared stories of his wandering life. He'd been orphaned at 12 and raised by various ranch hands who taught him everything from horsebreaking to reading. He'd never known the kind of settled love Rebecca described, but he'd learned to find contentment in simple things: a good horse, honest work, and the vast freedom of the open range. "Why did you never marry?" Rebecca asked one evening as they sat by their campfire, the horses grazing nearby. Cole poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the starlit sky. "Never found anyone who could see past the wandering to the man underneath," he said honestly. "Most women want stability, a house, a future they can count on. I never had those things to offer." "And now?" Rebecca asked quietly. Cole looked across the fire at her, studying her face in the flickering light. She'd changed during their journey. The desperate grief was still there, but it was tempered now with determination and something that might have been hope. "Now I'm thinking maybe it's time to stop wandering," he said simply. Their arrival at the Double R Ranch was everything Cole had promised. Ranch owner Robert Riley was a gruff but fair man in his 60s who welcomed Rebecca without question when Cole vouched for her character. The cook's cabin was small but clean, with a proper stove and enough room for Rebecca to make it her own. "Mrs. Hayes will handle the cooking and cleaning for the main house," Riley explained to his dozen ranch hands that first evening. "Anyone gives her trouble answers to me and to Mitchell here. We clear." The Cowboys, a rough but decent group, nodded their understanding. They'd all heard the story of the hurricane and were inclined to be protective of the widow who'd lost everything. Rebecca threw herself into her new responsibilities with characteristic determination. She proved to be an excellent cook, transforming the Cowboys' simple fare into hearty, flavorful meals that had them fighting for second helpings. She organized the chaotic main house, mended clothes, and even helped with minor medical care when the men were injured. But it was the small moments with Cole that began to heal her heart. He would appear at her kitchen window each morning to share coffee before the workday began. He helped her plant a small garden behind her cabin, bringing seeds from town and teaching her which vegetables grew best in the local soil. On Sunday evenings, when work was done, they would sit on her cabin porch and talk about everything and nothing while the sun set over the Texas plains. If you're loving this journey of healing and new beginnings, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. 3 months into their new life, a spring storm rolled across the ranch. Nothing like the devastating hurricane, but enough to bring back memories. Rebecca found herself shaking as the wind picked up, her mind returning to that terrible night in the church. Cole found her huddled in her kitchen, gripping a cup of coffee with white knuckles as rain lashed against the windows. "Hey," he said softly, settling beside her at the small table. "It's just a spring shower, nothing like before." "I know," Rebecca whispered, but her hands continued to tremble. "I know it's foolish, but every time the wind starts to howl..." Without hesitation, Cole reached across the table and covered her hands with his. "It's not foolish. That storm changed everything for both of us." Rebecca looked up at him, seeing understanding in his eyes rather than pity. "Do you ever regret it? Staying to help me instead of leaving town like everyone else?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "That storm brought me the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said finally. "Why would I regret that?" The simple honesty in his words broke down the last of Rebecca's carefully maintained walls. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she truly looked at this man who had risked everything for a stranger and asked for nothing in return. "Cole," she whispered, and something in her voice made him lean closer. "I know you're not ready," he said gently. "I know you're still grieving, still healing. I'm not asking for anything you can't give." "What if I want to give it?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. "What if I'm tired of being afraid of feeling again?" Cole's breath caught as he searched her face, seeing not just grief and fear, but genuine affection and the tentative stirrings of love. "Then we take it slow," he said softly. "One day at a time. No pressure, no promises we're not ready to keep." Rebecca nodded, then surprised them both by leaning forward to press a gentle kiss to his cheek. It was soft and brief, but it carried the weight of new beginnings and hard-won trust. "One day at a time," she agreed. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and fresh with the scent of new growth. As summer progressed, Cole and Rebecca's relationship deepened naturally, built on friendship, mutual respect, and shared experience. He taught her to ride properly, and she taught him to appreciate the simple pleasure of a well-ordered home. They worked side by side in her garden, their easy conversation and comfortable silences marking the growth of something precious. By the time autumn painted the Texas landscape in shades of gold and red, Rebecca had begun to sleep without nightmares. Her laughter came more easily, and the shadows in her green eyes had lifted. She still treasured her memories of James, but they no longer defined her entire existence. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Cole took her hand and turned to face her fully. "Rebecca," he said seriously, "I want you to know that whatever this is between us, however far it goes, you've already given me more happiness than I ever thought possible." She smiled, the expression lighting up her whole face. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Cole Mitchell, and I want you to know..." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm ready to stop looking backward. I'm ready to build something new." Their kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. Around them, the Texas evening settled into peaceful quiet, broken only by the soft whisper of wind through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. The hurricane had destroyed Rebecca's old life, but from that destruction had grown something infinitely more precious, a love built on shared hardship, mutual respect, and the courage to begin again. And so, from the devastating winds of that terrible hurricane came an unexpected gift, the love between Cole and Rebecca, two souls who found each other in the storm and built a new life from the wreckage of the old. What did you think of this story of survival and second chances? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which part resonated most with you? The dramatic rescue during the hurricane, or the gentle way their love grew in the aftermath? If you enjoyed this tale of the Old West, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. There are so many more adventures waiting to be told. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video.